All right, we will call to order our public meeting for Thursday, October 5th. Would you please join me in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Missoula County acknowledges that this event takes place in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. We have some public announcements. First, Cheryl on closed captioning.
Hello, everyone. If you are joining us for this meeting virtually today, instructions for turning on closed captioning are on your screen. If you're joining us in person, we'll have closed captioning on all the screens here in the Sophie Moise room. We ask that all speakers today please remember to speak slowly and clearly during the meeting. This helps with the accuracy of the closed captioning. There will be multiple chances during the meeting for public comment virtually. During those times, if you'd like to speak, we ask that you use the raise hand feature. If you are on Microsoft Teams, this is a small hand button. If you are calling in on the phone, you will need to hit *5 to raise your hand. Then once called on, you will need to hit *6 to unmute. Thank you.
Thanks. What do you guys want to take on the pet commissioner?
Sure. Okay, this is our proclamation. Missoula County held a contest in August of 2023 on Missoula County Voice to elect its second pet commissioner to provide a fun way for residents to engage with and learn about local government. And competition was fierce, with 17 candidates that included cats, dogs, fish, a bunny, and a crested gecko. And these candidates ran on diverse platforms and myriad campaign promises, which included advocating for safety, animal rights, public lands, equity, housing, and mental health. And following an intense campaign season, Kristalina, the crested gecko, beat out the competition with 104 votes. And she has promised to make Missoula County's pets happier than a lizard with a heat lamp in a snowstorm by listening to their concerns, and Kristalina will work especially hard to give a voice to all pets, including reptilian and amphibious pets in Missoula County. And Kristalina will work with Missoula County to promote civic engagement and responsible pet ownership across the county. And Kristalina's best friend, Christopher, has agreed to act in an advisory capacity. And we have full confidence that Kristalina will proudly represent the fluffy puppers, floofy or fluffy? Floofy puppers, chonky cats, and all other feathery, furry, and scaly babies in Missoula County. Now, therefore, we, the Missoula County Board of Commissioners in the state of Montana, do hereby proclaim October 5th, 2023, Kristalina the crested gecko as Missoula County's second pet commissioner and bestow upon her our full support as she serves her year-long term. You're the chair. Yes. There we go.
You need to recognize the outgoing pet commissioners.
So grateful for his service. Yes.
Service. Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Do it. Yeah, up on the diet. Yeah, let's get her up.
Yeah.
Trip hazard out of the way. Where do you want him?
You can write in the center, yeah.
Yeah, right in the center.
I'm getting on your papers.
Oh, you're.
No, that's fine.
This
Hey,
way.
kids.
Hitch up. Oh, come on, one more try.
There
Yeah, covers.
There we go. Then, yeah, can you guys all, yeah.
And if we put that little treat right there, if someone holds it and says his name,
Oh, okay.
you stay, and I'll go on the other side.
Oh, yeah, so he'll just follow you.
There we go. Do we have? Oh, I don't want her to, don't eat the gecko. Okay.
Yeah.
So be cautious.
We can just leave him in the, I don't want, you can leave him in the box.
Yeah, I've got his collar.
Yeah, they will just. Wait,
Yeah.
Christopher, you have to come get in the photo.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Oliver, yeah.
You want Oliver or you want the
Oh,
The
all,
whole
the whole
transition
team,
team,
the
right?
whole team. Need the whole team. Yeah, and then does anyone do you need to get on the chair? You can. Here, why don't you, what's your name again?
Tobin?
Tobin, why don't you jump on this chair so everyone can see you?
No.
Oh, you gotta hold up the sign. Can you see it? There we go. There we go. Oh, wait, Allison, can you grab? Oh, wait, well, we got one over here. Are you, okay. Thank you. Way to go, Gidge. Thanks, Gidge. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tobin. Thank you. You're so good.
You're a
Yes.
nice dog. You're such a nice dog.
We're excited for you, Kristalina. Okay.
You don't have to stick around for the whole meeting. This was the best part. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
All right, now that we have a fourth commissioner in place, we have another proclamation to read. This proclamation is in recognition of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Whereas without regard to age, race, gender, religion, or economic status, the issue of domestic violence affects thousands of residents of Missoula. As victims endure abuse from a spouse or partner, it has an influence on their families, communities, and entire families, in fact. And whereas physical violence, sexual violence, and/or stalking in intimate relationships affect 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men at some point in their lives, in Montana, intimate partner physical violence, sexual violence, and/or stalking affect 37% of women and 35% of men. The probability of intimate relationship femicide is at least 5 times higher when abusers have access to firearms. And whereas statistics show 6% of American Indian and Alaskan Native women have experienced physical abuse from an intimate partner, Native women are 2.5 times more likely than other groups of women to be assaulted in the United States. Homicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for Native women. And the origins of domestic violence and abuse of Native people can be traced to colonialization, including the introduction of alcohol, forced removal of children, boarding schools, and loss of land, culture, language, and traditional ways of life. And whereas the effects of domestic violence are widespread, having immeasurable impacts on society from people in our neighborhoods to people in communities around our nation, including causing lasting trauma, loss, grief, physical injuries that may be disabling, and lifelong psychological injuries. Further, these impacts take on an economic toll on victims when accounting for medical costs, lost productivity, legal fees, and property loss. domestic violence victims incur lifetime costs of nearly $82,000, and the United States incurs 3.6 trillion in costs. Yet dollars cannot measure the lifelong impacts on victims and their children who experience trauma from domestic violence in their homes. And whereas, according to research, domestic violence can be decreased by building communities where people are connected, caring, and supportive of one another. And whereas every day in Missoula County, people and organizations support those who have been affected by domestic abuse by offering services and resources, including therapy, legal counsel, education, housing, advocacy, and medical care. And therefore, be it resolved, we, Missoula County and the City of Missoula, do hereby proclaim the month of October as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, dated this day of October 2023 by the Mayor and the Board of County Commissioners.
Thanks, Dave. Our current claims list, claims received as of September 19th, 2023 to September 25th, 2023 by the Commissioner's Office, total $2,118,421.10. We have one hearing today, and this is on the Elk Valley Ranch subdivision, and Jenny Dixon will present. Thanks. Tim Worley will.
Tim and I both are.
Okay, tag team.
Yes. And
Awesome,
so
thank you.
I think Tim will just start off and then I'll pick up in the middle.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm Tim Worley, Senior Planner with Planning, Development, and Sustainability, and this is Elk Valley Ranch subdivision, a proposal for 14 lots on about 32 acres in the Huson area. The applicant is JLL Investments, represented by IMEG. And this is the property on the north side of Frenchtown Frontage Road, northwest of the Huson interchange. I'll put a bead on the 32-acre property that we're talking about. It is a few miles west of Frenchtown, immediately north of Frenchtown Frontage Road in Huson. And this is the plat. Most of the lots are on the southern end of the property and served by this loop road, which Jenny will go into more detail about later. And the northerly portion of the subdivision is divided into three roughly 5-acre lots. This property is unzoned. The growth policy in this area recommends open and resource uses for this location, which is also, I should note, within the Huson Activity Center. Just to give you some perspective of the two local activity centers, Frenchtown's is considerably bigger. It's about 4 miles across, or 4 miles in diameter, whereas Huson's is about 2 miles across, 2 miles in diameter. Now, open and resource is not primarily a residential land use designation. The growth policy does note, however, that area growth should happen in the activity center. Just to note, for Huson's Activity Center, just some of the features and development that you find within the activities center include the interchange itself, the end of AJ Memorial Trail. There's a storage unit development not far from the interchange. There's a small bar and grill. There's an area zone for commercial, residential uses, and actually open and resource uses as well, although most of the property within the circle is unzoned. And there's a lot of wide open spaces as well, so a definite mix of land uses. We find that about 1/3 of the circle is marginally buildable because of floodplain and lack of roads, and that's this area on the southern portion of the activity circle. So we asked the question, what are the valued resources in this area? Well, those would include agriculture, the natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat. And so we looked to what extent these resources are impacted by this proposal. We found that this has a history of irrigated alfalfa, and it's been grazed. This location's been grazed. The property has water rights through the Frenchtown Irrigation District, and the soils on the property grade from prime farmland on the southern edge to farmland of local importance as you move north. We concluded that post subdivision, there would be fragmentation of agriculture, although there are some area small farms that are comparably sized. Note again that those 3 parcels on the northern end are 5+ acres each. And on those 3 5-acre parcels, there are building envelopes on the southern end of those larger properties. So that would confine residential development to the southern end of those 3 parcels. We also concluded that irrigation will continue following subdivision. It will have perhaps a dual function, allowing for lawn and garden irrigation, where the larger lots will be able to use the irrigation water for at least potentially irrigated agriculture. And so we concluded that significant adverse impacts have been mitigated by the design and by conditions of approval. So on to issues of the natural environment, wildlife and wildlife habitat. This is elk winter range. There is wildlife linkage potential in this area, although I think Fish, Wildlife and Parks concluded this location is of lower importance as far as a linkage because of so much fragmentation in the area through residential development. Mountain lion and bear conflicts have been noted on occasion in neighboring properties, in and on neighboring properties. So Fish, Wildlife and Parks commented to expect wildlife use at this location, and they recommend the typical mitigations, which are to reduce attractants. So the covenants recommend that garbage be addressed. This is the typical living with wildlife covenants. Building envelopes are going to be employed on the northern 3 properties, and wildlife-friendly fencing is required as a condition of approval for the northerly 3 properties. And I should note that bear-resistant garbage containers are a required condition of approval. So certainly some impact to the natural environment, wildlife, and wildlife habitat are expected from this development, but our conclusion is that significant adverse impacts have been mitigated either through the design or through required conditions of approval. So our conclusion is, looking at the growth policy, that this is not in substantial compliance with the growth policy. However, the growth is contained within the activity center, which this location is not distant from infrastructure. It's close to the interchange and the AJ Memorial Trail. So, but we also concluded that state law requires us not to impose conditions or recommend denial based solely on the growth policy, or make any sort of recommendation based solely on the growth policy, and that significant adverse impacts have been mitigated through conditions of approval. As far as water rights are concerned, the applicant seeks to be exempt from water rights permitting. So there will be 14 wells proposed with limited flows, where lawn and garden areas will be kept to a maximum of 7,500 square feet of irrigation. So we do have a condition recommending monitoring of use of the 14 lots through metering, and to provide reporting periodically to DNRC and the planning office. And I think I might skip this letter for now, and maybe Jenny, just go to your section and maybe we can come back to this.
So for the record, my name is Jenny Dixon with Planning, Development, Sustainability, and I'm just going to pick up on a few of the other primary review criteria for this subdivision proposal that Tim hasn't covered yet. What you see here is the plat with the aerial in the background. So it shows you the proposed loop road coming off of Frenchtown Frontage Road with driveway on the west side to serve the far northwest 5-acre tract, and then a shared driveway which has to be built to road standards to serve the 2 northeastern tracts, and all other lots then will be coming off of the loop road. You can also see with some highlight the white not asphalt. Actually, I think it might be asphalt walkway that goes around the outer edge of that loop road. There are no pedestrian facilities shown or proposed for Frenchtown Frontage Road, as they are not required. This shows it a little bit clearer without the homes, what that road configuration looks like. And I'm going to go back here in a second, but this is an explanation of through lots that on this plan are the 4 lots that are encompassed by the Loop Road and Frenchtown Frontage Road. And those are to be avoided in subdivision. Oftentimes we will have conditions of approval recommended to mitigate the impacts of through lots. And through lots means that there are roads on 2 opposite sides of a lot, which then makes it really hard to kind of figure out which is front and which is back, and can oftentimes result in some tall obscuring type fencing along an area that you really wouldn't want to, that you would think almost is the front. But in this case, the applicant has proposed 185-foot setback from Frenchtown Frontage Road on those 4 lots. So all of the development on those 4 lots will occur within 135 feet of that smaller, lesser classification road. There is also a billboard located on, I can't read that with my old eyes. The lot, let me see here. Lot 8. Got it. I got it. It's lot 8. Yeah, and Tim is giving a little highlight spot. Thanks, Tim. So we are not recommending any additional conditions of approval relative to the through lots because they are proposed a setback that will keep the homes and all development away from Frenchtown Frontage Road and not create a wall of, let's say, fencing or storage of vehicles or anything like that. And also, there's a significant enough elevation change between Frenchtown Frontage Road and the site that it didn't seem reasonable to propose a condition for berms or landscaping. The Frenchtown irrigation ditch does provide, as Tim mentioned, provides water to the site, and it comes up on the property. Tim's going to, show you that location there and then provide irrigation water to all of the lots. The lots on that southeast corner with groundwater testing showed some high groundwater to 96 inches, which I'm sure IMEG will discuss in more detail, but it did lead them to do to propose a condition or a provision within the covenants that basements not be allowed on any of the lots in the subdivision. Okay, the last no worries, not a problem at all. The last thing I want to talk about, and I think there are 3 slides to give an explanation of the no build zones or the build zones, all 3 areas where either building is allowed or not allowed. Okay. So most obvious, and you've seen it time and again, is areas over 25% slope will be designated for as no build, no alteration. That just means no activity at all is permitted in those areas, so it will remain undisturbed. The allowable build zones, which we've requested be relabeled as building envelope, that's a term we use more typically, and it's more immediately recognized by staff and the public when we say building envelope, and that's for those 3 larger tracts where all structures would need to be constructed. So that leaves a space in between. That space in between is proposed by the applicant to be the area for wildlife and agricultural impact mitigation. In other words, given that there are some soils of local importance and prime soils here, as well as past agricultural activity, the applicant felt that this keeping that area open for agricultural opportunity, I believe, was their proposed mitigation for impacts to ag. And so this agricultural no build zone is about 350 feet from the back of the building envelope to the north property line. That is an area where agricultural activities could occur. Utilities could also be placed in there, and you can see there are some septic drain field areas, replacement areas, and wells in that area, that agricultural no build. And also fencing within and around that entire area would be limited to wildlife-friendly fencing only. That area is also proposed as the area for wildlife and wildlife habitat mitigation. And Tim covered the wildlife portion of the primary review criteria, but I wanted to show you graphically the area that the applicant is proposing as the area that's mitigating impacts to wildlife and wildlife habitat. Planning Board conducted a public hearing on September 19th. They recommended approval of the subdivision in a 5-2 vote. They addressed concerns about impacts to agricultural use and agricultural soils, impacts on wildlife habitat and wildlife use of the area, adequacy of the conflicts between wildlife and agricultural mitigation, the effectiveness of these no-build zones I just discussed, flooding potential and impacts on sanitation systems due to potential high groundwater, compliance with the DNRC water use restrictions, and the impact to local wells, the road design and mitigation for the proposed through lots, rural character, and the growth policy compliance. So in that, you can assume in that vote that 5 planning board members felt that this proposed subdivision was adequately mitigated by the recommended conditions of approval. 2 of them dissented. And I think at the time of planning board, we had a comment from West Valley Community Council, which serves as kind of a quasi agency. They're an agent. We notify them during agency review period, but I also like to treat it somewhat as public comment. So they addressed issues in that letter relative to impacts on schools, agriculture, roads, wildlife habitat, law enforcement, pedestrian facilities, and open space. And I'm not sure, but I believe Jerry Dellis, who is, I think, the chairperson of the council, might be online here and can speak to that a little bit more. She posted that comment. Not only was it in your packet, but she posted it on Missoula County Voice. And then I would also just mention there was one other comment on Missoula County Voice expressing concern about the fiscal impacts of subdivision on tax, as far as tax burden on people in the county. that they perceive that the subdivision will result in increased taxes ultimately. And so with that, I think we've covered all of the criteria for your consideration today, and would be happy to take questions.
Oh, it looks like Tim's got some.
Commissioners, I was just going to summarize a comment that we received from the Conservation District. I think you may have received it as well.
Yeah.
But four major bullets came from the Conservation District. They were concerned about growth policy compliance, and I'll just summarize, but stating that the growth policy does not explicitly earmark this land for development. They were concerned about public health and safety regarding irrigation and whether that causes the groundwater to rise, which in turn could be a conflict with septic systems. We didn't ultimately see an issue there because I think 96 inches was how high the groundwater was measured to have risen by some proxy types of evaluation. And really, you need a 4-foot separation between a drain field and groundwater. And so there's a significant difference between 48 inches and 96. So we didn't see a problem, especially since the homes are not going to have basements. They did note that they felt that there was inadequate agricultural impact mitigation, and that maybe staff's recommendation that the adequate mitigation has occurred is kind of a vague conclusion. And we can dig deeper into that if you would like. And then finally, water appropriation in individual wells. I think there was a concern that how do you monitor 14 users over time to make sure that there's not a violation of the exempt water right? This is actually an ongoing question that goes beyond Missoula County, because this is not uncommon for there to be some sort of mechanism of measuring folks staying under the allocated 10 acre feet per year. We don't have a perfect solution, but we do have a recommendation for ongoing metering of the individual wells that requires an annual reporting to DNRC.
So Tim, the irrigation off the irrigation ditch, is that available to all those 3 larger properties?
Yeah, all properties within the subdivision.
Yeah, I was just.
Sorry, all 14, yeah. The 3 5+ acre, and then the smaller, like 2 acres and less, the rest of them will all receive irrigation water.
Okay, thanks. Developers representative, want to speak? Oh, great.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks.
Absolutely. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. Bring it on, Joe.
All right. I'm going to navigate. Inevitable confusing. It looks like I don't have capability to share right now. Is that something I can be given
we can fix that.
real time? All right, great. All right, it looks like I was just given permission, so you'll have to let me know when everybody can see my screen.
We're good.
Phenomenal. Whoever's giving these capabilities for sharing, and also the camera, if you're the same person, phenomenal job so far today. That zoom in on the gecko was quite impressive. And I'm not going to lie to you, I screenshotted it, and I might make that my background. Best start to a commissioner's hearing ever. All right, well, let's just jump right in here today. I'm going to try to keep it brief. My name is Joe Dennert, and I work for the IMEG office in Missoula. I am joined by my coworker today, Danny Oberweiser, and I actually think there's some folks from the development team in the room there as well today, and we're representing the landowner, JLL Investments LLC, for the Elk Valley Ranch major subdivision. That will probably get confused in the transcript. And really, like I said, I plan to keep this fairly brief and just provide some additional context in light of the planning board's discussion and also the letter received from the Conservation District. All right, jumping right in with groundwater and groundwater monitoring. So, we really did an overwhelming amount of testing out here, and the site is 100% compliant for drainfield permitting regarding public health and safety per local and state regulations from the Missoula City County Health Department's perspective and DEQ's perspective. And I'm just reiterating this because some of the conversations that happened at Planning Board, we groundwater monitored at 7 locations in 2022, and those on this screen, because it's pretty small text and image on the slide, have been outlined in yellow. So all the yellow groundwater monitoring locations were from 2022. And one hole in 2022, this is groundwater monitoring hole 1 here, in that southwestern portion, did have groundwater detected at 96 inches. Now, like Tim mentioned, that data still allows for compliant drainfield permitting, and that was included in the health department's letter for our groundwater monitoring. Then while we were digging the 30 soil profile holes for drain fields in Missoula County, you need 2 soil profiles for the drain field. We noticed some redoxomorphic conditions in 3 of the soil profile holes. And those are usually pretty indicative of some sort of irrigation influence. So to do our due diligence, we decided to actually conduct additional groundwater monitoring at those 3 locations. And during the 2023 season, none of those holes had any groundwater detected. And those 3 groundwater monitoring holes are outlined here in green. Regarding the irrigation on the lots, there was discussion surrounding kind of the influence of irrigation of the lawns and the impacts that irrigation could have on the drain fields. So I just want to repeat here that the proposed continued use of the irrigation water on these lots is for lawn and garden use. Minus the larger ag lots to the north, there isn't a need for the heavy flood irrigation that you might experience with agricultural production that may have a negative impact on drain fields. So in this case, really what we're talking about and what I just want to reiterate is that, it would be no different than the hundreds or thousands of other drain fields around the county, which are located under sprinklered or maintained lawns. Regarding the agricultural resource preservation, if we exclude the steep slopes, the building envelopes, and the drain field areas of these ag lots to the north, the project is setting aside 10.3 acres preserved for agricultural use only. And that equates to a little over 30%, I think around 32% of the entire gross project area. Unfortunately, the state review criteria for impacts to ag or ag water user facilities doesn't really provide a set percentage required for mitigation, which leaves it somewhat ambiguous. But based off the staff's findings of facts and that large percentage of property being preserved in the design, we do feel like this project more than meets the required reasonable mitigation of potentially significant adverse impacts. And as far as the purview of the subdivision, we haven't really determined what hobby farms or ag operations will be proposed moving forward on these larger lots. We are simply required to address the potential adverse impacts. So while the south half of the site is prime farmland if irrigated, and that would be the area that has the most impact, we are still preserving farmland of local importance in those northern ag lots. So it's not poor soil being preserved. And when choosing to preserve this area, we really looked at it a bit more holistically, while taking into considerations other factors like impacts to wildlife. If the northern half of this were densely developed and the southern prime farmland area preserved, I think it would result in further fragmenting of the property and trying to advocate for density even further away from an established road corridor and further into the area known to have filtering wildlife going across the property didn't seem intuitive. Regarding water use, truth be told, there might have been some confusion regarding the 35 gallon per minute threshold and whether or not it pertained to all of the wells. And I have to take full responsibility on that front if I was a master of confusion in any of the discussions there. So my apologies, but just want to reiterate and clarify here that each well is subject to that 35 gallon per minute threshold. And then all the wells combined cannot exceed that 10 acre feet per year. The individual wells will be for domestic use on each lot. And we're supplementing the irrigation with the legal shares available from the Frenchtown Irrigation District. And these shares will be used for lawn and garden irrigation on all of these lots. There is ample water availability to accommodate this development without exceeding these thresholds. And we're completely fine with the monitoring as stipulated in the condition. And there will also be an HOA proposed here to create further accountability. You know, we do not expect to exceed the DNRC predetermined approved water use just because we do have those irrigation shares for domestic lawn and garden. And, you know, even having something like monitoring, even though, as Tim mentioned, there's still yet to be determined the policing parameters on this, there will be more accountability than a lot of the other residential homes or farms that are using exempt wells for domestic purposes. As Tim mentioned, you know, this property is not zoned. So in regards to the growth policy, on this slide, I've tried to kind of marry both the activity circle and also that open and resource designation, which, you know, we are both within the open and resource and within the Houston activity circle. So when these two conditions are present on a property, from our perspective, we really like to look at it, the context for what's being proposed. And in this case, as seen on the slide above, you can see it in kind of the addressing via those red dots and some of the smaller parcels. There are vast swaths of open and resource land as you move further into the hinterland areas, closer to the river, across to the south, across the interstate, further to the west along the interstate. But this property fronts, you know, the Frenchtown Frontage Road, a major thoroughfare. It's next to the interstate, and it's surrounded by existing residential development on three sides. And although the Conservation District's letter mentioned the earmarking for development, you know, it isn't explicitly earmarked for growth, but it also isn't explicitly earmarked for preservation either. And from the consultant and applicant's perspective, it's sometimes challenging to hit a moving target when we know that expectations can change depending on the interpretation of a nuance like this in the growth policy recommendation. So we largely focused and kept our focus on the state and local requirements for significant impact mitigation, and believe we have done so. That's also supported by the staff report. You know, I often try to imagine the state of development when these plans were created, and this plan slotting this area as both open and resource and within the activity center, being drafted back in the 70s, over 50 years ago, there was likely much more open space out here, and they still included this area within an activity center that was, you know, intended for growth. So we do believe that there are many areas within that open and resource designation that would have some of the unfitting characteristics that really wouldn't be suitable. You know, properties with steep slopes throughout. Tim mentioned, you know, floodplain, lack of access, riparian habitat, et cetera. There's a number of conditions that would make them really not appropriate for development. But this property, which is close to the Memorial Trail infrastructure, close to the I-90 interchange, and surrounded by existing development on three sides, has mitigated any significant impact to the review criteria stated in the staff report, and we don't believe it contradicts any of the adjacent land uses. Yeah, with that, I want to thank you for your time and for letting me speak briefly on some of the specific discussions that we've had up to this point in the project. And myself and Danny Oberweiser are here for any questions or to provide any helpful context as needed. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Joe. Would any of you guys from the investment company want to speak? You're welcome to if you want to say something. Thank you. Just want to make sure you know you're welcome to. Do you guys have any questions?
Okay, I've got a few. So activity centers, activity circles, you know how much I love these and hope that they go away in the next iteration of the growth policy. But in the meantime, could you recap for us what they actually mean? So if you've got your underlying land use designations, you have superimposed on that an activity center. Does that contemplate that that it's likely, or if not encouraged, it's seen as a possibility that and acceptable that the density that's associated with the land use designation might be exceeded?
Yeah, activity centers there's a mosaic of land uses within them and land use recommendations, everything from commercial to 2 per acre residential to 1 per 10 to open and resource. And this does happen to be on that open and resource end of the spectrum. But we also look at what land is available within the circle for practical development. We've done this primarily with I'm actually looking at both the Frenchtown and Houston activity centers. We've done this with Frenchtown in particular, since so much of that area is basically unbuildable. It's either steep slopes or it's floodplain. To a certain extent, that's going on within the Houston activity center. So
I guess more specific, what does it mean? Well, so you got an activity center, like, so what? Does that have what bearing does that have on the underlying land use designations?
it doesn't necessarily erase that land use designation. It's kind of a both and. So there's an ambiguity there to be sure. And this, we really wrestled in this case, being an unzoned property, but also within the circle, what to do with that open and resource. And we also, yeah, like mid 70s.
So this
Yeah,
is just an idea from the 70s that,
Yeah.
okay.
Another world from where we are now.
Yeah. And for my part, I think it's helpful to concentrate growth around like a freeway interchange. And we do have some findings to that effect. It's still, we don't want to ignore the fact that it's open and resource. That designation didn't go away. And when we adopted the 2016 growth policy, we essentially reaffirmed the 75 plan that includes the activity circles. Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears to irrigation. So will each, so you mentioned each of the lots will have access to irrigation water. Will there be a ditch constructed to each property, or how will the water be conveyed?
That might be better answered by IMEG, but I think there is going to be a system for water delivery. It's not just a potential, it's an actual engineered system for water delivery.
Yeah, that's correct. Once again, this is Joe Dennert from IMEG, and the plan is basically within the proposed irrigation easement to have that buried pipeline and stubs out to each lot to make sure that each lot does have the infrastructure to receive that irrigation water.
Okay, thanks. One more question. So the through lots 8, 9, 10, and 11, is there any need for a no access strip along the Frenchtown frontage road? Is that there already?
They have proposed it, and also they wouldn't get approach permits on the Frenchtown frontage road anyway, but there is a 1 foot no access strip along those lots.
Okay, that's one of the conditions.
It's in their,
Okay.
it's on their plat. Let's put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I just need a little history lesson. Like, I think, I don't know, maybe Joe, you had a growth policy slide. The last presentation you had. What I'm trying to understand is what's sort of subdivisions are around this, because I look at it and I can see like the red dots, but those are just the addresses that are right now. What approved subdivisions are around this area? Because I'm not seeing.
So
How much more building have we, is already
I
in
think
the
Tim's-
hopper?
Yeah, Tim's going to be bringing up either the property information system or a slide. But you'll probably recognize this tract as the remaining tract of a family transfer that was approved in 2018. And the tracts that are to the east of it, which is a 23-acre tract and four approximately 2 to 5 acre tracts, those were all family transfer tracts, with this being the remaining tract. So these 1 acre tracts or 1.5 acre tracts in this subdivision are smaller, generally smaller than what's found to the east and certainly to the north, which is a large acreage, 400 acre open lands, although privately owned. And then to the west of this is, and Tim's got that pulled up,
Thanks.
that shows is the yellow subdivision. Is that subdivision?
Yeah, the yellow or tan color is subdivision. And because this is a pending subdivision, it's purple in the property information system.
So you can see subdivision around it, although I think there may be just a couple of 1 to 2 acre tracts to the west of the site, the purple site. In the area, other tracts are generally 5s and 20s and much larger. But you've got some, right, if you can see that there to the west, some smaller tracts. And then, of course, across the interstate, you have, is that a subdivision or is it just zoned?
Houston Acres is a minor subdivision that was approved within the last
Yeah.
18 months.
Okay.
How about the kind of
Pink.
pinkish?
17001.
I think that was a family transfer, actually.
That is one of the family transfer tracts. By the Kluswich family, and that one is no longer owned by the Kluswich family. I think it's Gary Brady is the owner's name. But I don't know. It says it looks like it's a project approved. I'm not sure what that project would be.
I think there was a subsequent transfer on that parcel that's not been filed yet.
So we don't know how many parcels are.
I think that was 2 lots, but
Oh.
I can't remember the different parcel sizes.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah, I just have to say it. Yeah, one of my great regrets in serving in this office was that family transfer to the east. I think we were bamboozled in the process there, but I recognize that the subject property today is under different ownership, so it is what it is.
Oh, I did have another minor question. Joe, when did you say that the 2023 irrigation season ended to do the final testing?
I believe we got our results back beginning to middle of August this year.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I do want to note it's kind of remarkable to get a letter from the Conservation District. I don't remember, maybe it's happened, but at least in my brief tenure here, I don't remember getting a letter of comment on a subdivision from them, which definitely caused me to think, well, we need to take this seriously, and I'm glad that Tim worked through it. I do want to be able to respond to them, and I want to ask our attorney, what, if you were to kind of draw the parameters around our decision space on something like this type of subdivision, what would that look like?
Can I just address the Conservation
Please.
District letter? Because, I was copied on it. I looked at it. And it's a little bit troubling to me because I don't believe that the conservation districts and all the supervisors within it considered this subdivision proposal and wrote this letter. And the reason I say that is because they haven't met since early September. And so, as I read this letter, it sounds like, it's drafted by their executive director. after speaking to the chairperson, Tim Hall, and Supervisor Bob Schrader and Associate Supervisor Josh Schrader. So it's a letter that is maybe speaks from two of the elected supervisors and one of the appointed associate supervisors that is in a non-voting capacity. Now, Josh Schrader is the representative of the Conservation District on the planning board. So he was at the meeting, at the planning board meeting on September 19th. And, you know, I'm speculating, but probably brought some concerns to Tim and his father. But I would not characterize this letter necessarily as the position of every supervisor on the Conservation District.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
And then, you know, in terms of the question about what's your decision space, I'm just going to read from the statute.
Please.
I'm going to read from the Subdivision and Plating Act, and this is, this is 76-3-608. That statute is entitled Criteria for Local Government Review. And that's what we're doing today. We're going through a local government review of the subdivision application. And it reads right off the bat, the basis for the governing body's decision to approve, conditionally approve, or deny a proposed subdivision is whether the subdivision application, preliminary plat, applicable environmental assessment, public hearing, planning board recommendations, or additional information demonstrates that a development of the proposed subdivision meets the requirements of this chapter. That's very, very broad and probably not very helpful to answering your question. And there isn't anything in the statute necessarily that's really helpful that puts a pin right on this is it right here. This is how you make your decision. But in evaluating the subdivision today, you're supposed to focus on the primary review criteria. We talk about these all the time. Planners call them the 608 criteria. And those are, you're supposed to review those for, quote, the specific, documentable, and clearly defined impact on agriculture, water user facilities, local services, the natural environment, wildlife habitat, and public health and safety. Okay, so those are sort of the primary criteria, and you heard Jenny Dixon go through each one and talk about the impacts, the perceived impacts to those primary criteria and how this subdivision is proposed to mitigate it through the conditions of approval. And that's how they reached their staff recommendation that it was for approval for you today. Diving a little bit deeper into that, and that review that you do of those primary criteria, the law allows you to require the subdivider, again, and I'm quoting, to design the proposed subdivision to reasonably minimize potentially significant adverse impacts to water user facilities, natural environment, local services, blah, blah, blah. What I've already said. So your decision space is you evaluate those criteria. If you see that there are impacts to those, then you can you can require the subdivider to reasonably mitigate those things. And again, I think the staff report has sort of walked through a mechanism for reasonably mitigating some of the impacts to the primary criteria. And finally, also in reviewing the proposed subdivision, you may, and again, I'm quoting from the law, you may not unreasonably restrict a landowner's ability to develop land, but it is recognized that in some instances, the impacts of a proposed development may be deemed unmitigable, mitigable, that's a tough word, and will preclude approval of the subdivision. So again, as part of your review of those primary criteria, if you find that it's not possible to mitigate the impacts, again, significant impacts, that's the quote, then it's within your discretion to deny the subdivision.
John, what happened a couple sessions ago in the legislature relative to agricultural impacts and consideration thereof?
They amended 608 and they prohibited a governing body to consider whether the proposed subdivision will result in a loss of agriculture soils such that you can no longer require land to be set aside, agriculture, land with important agriculture soils. You can't require a set aside or a payment of money in lieu of the loss of that land.
So what does it mean to consider agricultural impacts in light of what you just said?
Well, that's a great debate. And it's not clear from this language has been in the Subdivision and Platting Act since 1973. And it is not clear what the legislature meant when it wanted governing bodies to review the impacts to agriculture. The only Supreme Court decision that even talks about ag land is there was a subdivision proposal in Granite County, just over the Missoula County line, where a large parcel of agriculture land was set to be subdivided. Granite County commissioners denied that in part because it was going to add so much traffic to the road and consequently impact other farms and ranches in that area. By putting so much traffic on that road, they felt like that was going to impact other adjacent agricultural parcels and their ability to farm and ranch in a reasonable manner.
But in this case, I mean, if there had been no offer to mitigate any sort of agricultural soil, that the nuggets in the center, there's no reason to even do it, right? Is it just
We couldn't ask for that mitigation to happen.
You could not, again, require a set aside of land or a payment, cash payment in lieu of the loss of those soils. No.
so in this case, the IMEG or the developer is just doing it because why?
Yeah, well, I mean, you would have to ask them, but we
Or,
heard.
sorry, Joe, I guess you're right there. So I could.
We heard Joe talk a little bit about it, but he can speak for himself.
So just to reiterate, the question here is in relation to the statute, because we couldn't be made to do it. Why did we do it? Is that what you're
I
asking?
guess so. Yeah. Thanks. Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Well, our job as consultants is to be a clearinghouse for a lot of what happens in these rooms, in these discussions, and around the city and the county where we're working. And when a landowner comes to us with a project, what we try to do is marry what we've heard from public comments throughout the county, marry what we've heard from commissioner comment, city council comment, and put forth a project that could be supported and fit within the neighborhood context. So we had a lot of discussions with the development team, the landowner here. Danny and I really, tossed around a few different development ideas. And after meeting with the county in our first meeting, we really just honed in on this design for the preservation of those agricultural areas to the north, because we wanted the ability for wildlife to continue to filter across the property. We didn't want to, even though enabled by the legislature, completely remove agriculture from this land that does have both prime agricultural soils and farmland of local importance. So it was really a consideration given to both the context in which this project would be proposed, the nature of the property with surrounding development, and then also something that could be supported by the neighbors, by folks in the Houston area, and it really was a testament to flexibility and design by the landowner.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and Joe, make no mistake, we're glad that you're proposing what you are and not something much different than that. I do have a question. Did you have something you needed to add, Tim?
Yeah, I was just going to point out that ag impact mitigation is still a thing, and I think the applicant has attempted to do it with this design. It's just that if you were to, for instance, there's a prime soil, non-prime line that you draw through this property. If you were if staff were to recommend a mitigation that follows that line, that's what you can't do. But there's still ag and ag water that you have to mitigate impacts to with the design. So that didn't go away with that legislative change.
I guess what you see us struggling with is what that thing is that, well, what does it look like for the governing body to require some mitigation that would address ag, other than the applicants themselves doing something along those lines?
Yeah, I just want to remind you that that area, the 350-foot space on the north end is, and maybe Joe or Danny could speak to this in more detail, but it is the proposed mitigation, I believe, for the agricultural impacts and impacts to wildlife and wildlife habitat. And I think FWP is here to answer questions if you have them about about that.
I do have a question on another topic, though. John, you mentioned as far as review criteria or considerations, mitigation of impacts to local services. What does that mean? Because one of the comments we heard was a concern that this is going to cost, approving this is going to cost Missoula County more by way of delivering services. Nothing I heard you say explicitly refers to taking into consideration financial impacts to a local government, unless that falls broadly under local services. And I guess then you'd have to make the case that somehow this particular subdivision would, for instance, generate so much crime that we would have to hire another sheriff's deputy just for that. And is that a major significant impact to local services? I don't know. Any thoughts?
I believe this subdivision will be subject to impact fees because it will, I mean, if approved and if it receives a final plat, lot purchasers will then, presumably want to build something, and it's that building permit application that then triggers impact fees. So that would be one partial response to the concern that this is gonna raise people's taxes. Yeah, and I'm not an expert on the local service part of that. I mean, Jenny and Tim can speak to that more, but I think what the legislature was trying to do is just make sure that the subdivision had a reasonable access to police, fire protection, schools, and other, parks and things like that. That it wasn't something that those services would not be able to service.
And the
But
closest fire station is like right across the highway?
No, this should be subject to impact fees if they build after January 1.
Right.
Which should help on the edge, on the new edge of property taxes that any new construction causes.
Jenny just noted public comment. Do we need to take it?
Oh yeah, we're almost there. Are you guys?
Yeah,
Yeah.
public
I
comment.
had one other question, but I guess I can ask Joe. Joe, I appreciate the 30% set aside for agriculture. My only concern on this was that it's split across 3 different lots, and it would make sense if somebody wants to grow hay back there, but they'd be crossing into 3 different chunks of property. And you guys can speak to that, or would you encourage neighbors to work together? Or any thoughts on that?
Thanks. I think that's a good comment, and I kind of touched on it in our presentation. You know, the actual specific operations that are contemplated or the potential for operations aren't really fully baked at this point. You know, if the future lot owners on those larger lots do want to have collaboration on operations, there's nothing precluding, and if they wanted to, you know, lease that space for someone else to have an operation, and you know that individual wanted to lease 2 of the spaces because the landowners didn't want to do anything with ag. You know, there's a host of possibilities there. But you know, when it came down to the design, instead of completely removing the potential for at least 3 lots to be up there and just have the one larger ag lot, it made sense from the landowner's preference to at least have those 3 individual lots with the larger agricultural land preserved.
You have any comments, sir?
Hi, my name is Ryan Klimstra, and I'm the area biologist for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks based in Missoula here, and this area is part of my management. So I fly elk surveys and do deer surveys and things like that in this area in particular. And overall, I think this area is just fine, you know, in terms of we're not going to see any huge issues of displacing of elk or deer. We've actually had the opposite problem in this area when that parcel was in agriculture. We did have game damage issues, and so that's the one thing that comes to mind when we're talking about agriculture on that northern portion. There are elk that are in the vicinity that are to the north there that were coming down, you know, attracted to agriculture, alfalfa, things like that, and you know, in turn, you end up with vehicle strikes on I-90, things like that. And so that would be my only concern, I think, talking about agriculture. But I think that can also be mitigated by what type of crop, you're talking. If you're going to plant alfalfa, you're going to have elk. You know, they're going to come there. But if it's something else, you know, there's ways around that. I would just say we should be cautious on that, just so we're not attracting elk to these neighborhoods in turn creating a burden for agencies that have to respond to that, or a potential, human safety issue with vehicle strikes. And then in terms of, I think we've put in our letter, just the living with wildlife covenants, I think is our main recommendation there. And I think that's covered pretty well with the bear containers and all that. So.
Okay, thank you.
You.
Okay, any public comment on this? Anybody want to speak to this who hasn't yet? All right, what do you guys think? Motion? There is public comment? Oh.
There's none online.
Okay. If anybody's online, you want to speak, please raise your hand, let it be known. Say something in the
Star
chat.
5.
Star 5. Yell out the window.
Oh,
Okay,
planning board.
I'll go ahead and I move that we approve the Elk Valley Ranch subdivision based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. What does the amended refer to?
The planning board recommended adopting conditions of approval entirely as staff drafted them, with a very minor change in condition number 4 that deletes the word non-structural relative to ag use. They deleted the word non-structural.
Do we need as amended in our motion since we're just adopting what's coming to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take that out as long as it's clear that it's planning board's conditions, recommended conditions of approval.
Why does it look different on our, oh,
You go
On our-
with the RCA.
I'm just
Okay.
reading what's on the screen here.
I thought you would be looking at the conditions of approval in the staff report, and so planning and
oh, I'm looking at, okay, below the condition number 4 is revised by the planning board. Sorry.
yeah, and your RCA on the front page report, it shows you how condition number 4 is
Sorry,
amended.
got it. Okay.
So I think I don't know that it matters, just so it's clear, if you concur with deleting that word non-structural, which was staff recommendation at planning board, to just be clear that that's what you want to do.
As amended by the planning board.
Thank you.
As amended by the planning board, is that what we're gonna add in there? Okay. Second.
Yes.
Okay, any public comment? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, commissioners.
Jenny
Have a
and
wonderful
Tim.
day.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank Tim.